Hey guys, what's good? Welcome back to JDB Selects. Round 1 of the 2024 season is officially in the books. And my word, what a tough round for tipping. 6 of the 8 games went to the underdog, at least by the bookies anyway. So I do hope if you did take some dogs that you made some money. We shouldn't complain too much about unpredictability because that's what makes this great game as great as it is. However, we do want to try and get a few more tips right. So let's hope this week we can get a perfect round, 8 out of 8 to start the 2024 season. So going over last week's results, we managed to tip 4 out of 8 games. We obviously finished the week strong with the Saturday and Sunday games all going our way. I do think the Broncos and Warriors weren't necessarily a bad tip, maybe just bad performances from those two sides, and I should have known better than to bet against Bellamy in round 1, but it is what it is. I'll take another L in that department. Now, if you don't know by now, we are running a subscribers tipping comp again this season, and we do have some massive prizes up for grabs. So if you are keen to join, hit that link in the description, sign up to the tipping comp today, and be in to win potentially 2 tickets to the grand final, a 2025 NRL jersey of your choice, or a $50 NRL shop voucher. And speaking of the tipping comp, the first ladder of 2024 is here, and the man to beat so far is the Whangarei tipping guru with 12 points and a margin of 6. Like I said earlier, a very tough round for most. Unless your name is the Whangarei tipping guru or Hoodoo Hudson, both players with 12 tips, or 12 points, at the top of the ladder, with plenty of people hot on their tails. So congrats to those guys, and good luck to everyone else in the tipping comp this week. No need to muck around today, guys. Let's get stuck into my tips and predictions for round 2. Alright, round 2 gets underway on Thursday night with the 12th placed Brisbane Broncos hosting the 13th placed South Sydney Rabbitohs at Suncorp Stadium. Starting first with the Broncos, they were dealt a losing hand in Vegas, going down to the Roosters 20 points to 10 in the second match of the historic doubleheader. Brisbane were put on the back foot early, with an HIA taking Brendan Piakura from the field and forcing Kevy Walters to reshuffle his troops, most notably moving Patrick Harrigan from lock into the second row. Brisbane really did struggle under the high ball and came up with nearly twice as many errors as their opposition. It did seem to me that they may have gone in a little bit too confident, thinking that they'd have the speed and finesse to go around the Roosters, but really got beat up through the middle and rushed to move laterally. Adam Reynolds also struggled off the boot, coming up with too many short kicks and a couple of shanks, maybe worrying a little bit too much about the shorter ground dimensions, which obviously didn't help their cause. No doubt a very disappointing start to the season, especially for a side that was, arguably 5 minutes away from winning the grand final in 2023, but I do have no doubt that they will improve as the season progresses. And in terms of teams list for the Broncos this week, Brendan Piakura should be available to play given the long turnaround, so I am expecting an unchanged Broncos lineup. And as for the Rabbitohs, they will be hoping what happens in Vegas really does stay in Vegas, despite putting on one hell of a show against the Manly Sea Eagles, eventually coming unstuck 36 points to 24. It was a fast and physical game to kick off the season, with the Rabbitohs playing more direct with Damien Cook and Cody Walker looking dangerous early. Latrell Mitchell also looked to be back at his best, scoring a brilliant solo try, setting up 2 others and breaking 7 tackles. But even he couldn't stop his side from falling away in the final quarter, with the Bunnies seemingly switching off for a 10-minute period, which allowed the Sea Eagles to run away with the result. Now, I know it's only game 1, but I think it is quite concerning for South Sydney, as that was their exact problem in 2023. They've obviously never struggled to score points, but would sort of slip in and out of games, just as they did in Vegas. So, watch this space. That is something they desperately need to address. And as for teams list for the Bunnies, Jack Whiten still has 1 more game to serve in his suspension, so won't be making his Rabbitohs debut until round 3. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, the Broncos have won 3 of the last 4 games against the Bunnies and have a very good record over the Rabbitohs in Brisbane, winning 72% of all games played there since 1993. And looking at the odds, the bookmakers agree the Broncos are currently $1.40, with Souths coming back at $2.90. The line for this one is 7.5 points, and the total points line is 40.5 points. As always, those Thursday games tend to be crackers, but I have to take the home team here, the Broncos, by 1 to 12 points. I do think they'll want to bounce back quickly after that loss to the Roosters in Vegas, and they certainly have the side to do so, so I think the Broncos should be too strong for the Bunnies here. Moving now to the first of 2 Friday fixtures, starting first with the 8th placed Cronulla Sharks, taking on the 15th placed Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs at PointsBet Stadium. Starting first with Cronulla, the Sharks' decent record across the Tasman continued, coming back from behind to beat the Warriors 16 points to 12. Cronulla were on the wrong side of nearly every key stat, including run meters, errors, tackles made, and line breaks, but were still able to outscore and hold the Wars scoreless for the final 68 minutes. It was a gritty defensive effort from the Sharks that would have no doubt impressed Craig Fitzgibbon. However, they offensively lacked a lot of venom, with key playmaker Nicho Hynes scoring his lowest ever Supercoach result. Nonetheless though, a great start to Cronulla's season, and they've finally beaten the top 4 side, so I've got to eat my words after giving them shit last week. And in terms of teams list, Sifa Talakai and Ronaldo Mulitalo both picked up ankle injuries. Talakai is expected to be named to play this week, while Ronaldo's fitness will be assessed later in the week. And as for the Dogs, Canterbury unfortunately picked up where they left off in 2023, getting pumped by arch rivals Parramatta, 26 points to 8. The Dogs only saw 40% of the ball and were on the receiving end of a very lopsided stat sheet, but to their credit, they defended pretty well. Similar to previous years though, they lacked any real threat or direction on attack and came up with too many errors at key moments in the game. I did say last week that I believe they hadn't named their strongest side, and I personally would love to see Connor Tracy, Bronson Xerri and Toby Sexton brought into that starting side, but I don't think Cameron Serrata will make wholesale changes after round 1. And speaking of their teams list, obviously the big talking point from that game was Josh Adokar suffered that shoulder injury. Thankfully he hasn't broken anything, but he will still be out for around 2 to 4 weeks, meaning Serrata will be forced to reshuffle his backline. I'd assume that would mean Carraz and Wilson on the wings, and Bronson Xerri coming into that starting centre position. Looking at the two sides head to head, the Sharks have won 11 of the last 13 meetings between the two clubs. That includes 5 on the trot. The Dogs also haven't beaten Cronulla at PointsBet since 2011, a 13-year drought. And the live odds currently have the Sharks at $1.30 favourites, with the Bulldogs coming back at $3.40. The line for this one is 8.5 points, and the over-under is 39.5. Pretty easy one for me here, so I am going to take the Sharks, and I am going to take the Sharks 13+. I do think the Sharks are far too strong for the Dogs, and the Dogs still lack any threat or a direction in attack. They just look so lost out there, and I do think that Nicho Hynes will want to improve on his very, very quiet week last week. I think being at home in front of their home fans could really make the difference, so I am going to take the Sharks 13+. And the final game on Friday should be an absolute cracker too. We have the 11th placed Penrith Panthers hosting the 3rd placed Parramatta Eels, the Battle of the West at Bluebet Stadium. Starting first with Penrith, the Panthers started their charge towards an unlikely four-peat in the exact same way they started last year's premiership winning run, losing both the World Club Challenge and opening round fixtures this year to the Melbourne Storm, 8 points to 0. It was the first game in Nathan Cleary's career where he's been held scoreless, with the Panthers' attack looking clunky and disjointed. They came up with plenty of uncharacteristic errors which didn't allow them to maintain any pressure. I thought their outside backs though were as potent as ever, with Taylor May filling most of that void left by Stephen Crichton, but they certainly needed a little bit more through the middle and from their halves. There's no need to sound the alarm bells yet though, as the Panthers have proven that they only get stronger as the season progresses, so I do have no doubt they'll still be playing a big part in the finals this season. And in terms of teams list for the Panthers, Mitch Kenny is available for selection this week following his 1-game suspension for an inappropriate social media post. And as for the Eels, after dropping their opening 3 games last year, Parramatta started this year with a bang, downing crosstown rivals Canterbury 26 points to 8. It was a really strong showing for Parramatta, with their big 3 of Moses, Brown and Gutherson looking dangerous off the back of their imposing forward pack. Standouts for me were obviously Bryce Cartwright, who picked up where he left off in 2023, bagging a try-double, and new first-choice hooker Joey Lussick made the most of his opportunity with great service out of dummy half and a 40-20 to boot. The Eels really did look great in their first outing and only really allowed the Dogs into the contest in the final 15 minutes once fatigue had finally set in, which is obviously to only be expected in round 1. So after missing the 8 last year, Parramatta are off to a dream start. And teams list for the Eels, Moses is under a bit of an injury cloud. He played through a groin strain on the weekend and will no doubt be monitored this week, but is expected to start in the halves. Looking at the two sides head to head, the Eels have been the Panthers' bogey side in recent years, winning 4 of their last 6 games. That includes both of their meetings last season. Penrith, however, have been incredibly strong at home, winning a whopping 37 of their last 42 games at Bluebet and have defeated the Eels in 4 of their last 6 at the ground. The odds for this one had Penrith at $1.40 favourites, with Parramatta coming back at $3.10. The line is 7.5 points currently, and the over and under is 36.5. A very tough game to tip, especially after last week's performances, and probably will be a make or break game in the tipping this week. But I am going to back the home team. I'm going to take the Panthers here 1-12. I don't think they can lose 3 on the trot. I certainly don't hope so. I also struggled to read too much into the Eels' performance, given it was against a pretty lackluster Bulldogs side. That's not to say the Eels didn't look fantastic at times against the Dog. They certainly did, and they could certainly beat the Panthers again. They've proven time and time again recently that they can do that. But I do think the likes of Leota, Fisher, Harris, and Cleary all will stand up. Moving now to the first of 3 games on Super Saturday this season, starting first with the 4th placed Canberra Raiders taking on the 9th placed West Tigers at GIO Stadium in the nation's capital. Starting first with the Raiders, they avenged their 2023 season-ending loss to the Newcastle Knights on Friday night, securing a comprehensive 28-12 point win, which is bloody ironic too because I bagged them last week for never beating sides by more than 12 points last season. So of course they start their 2024 campaign with a 13+ win, so joke's on me. All jokes aside though, it was an impressive performance with the Milks Middles doing a number on the Knights pack and Jamal Fogarty creating plenty of chances by putting boot to ball. Canberra's fresh faces Zach Hosking and Morgan Smithies were outstanding in their club debut, while club legend Josh Papali'i led from the front and came up with a couple of huge effort plays. The Raiders certainly played like a team with a chip on their shoulder and thoroughly deserved the 2 points. In terms of teams list for Canberra, Danny Levi was taken from the field with a quad niggle, so his fitness will be monitored, while Seb Chris is available for selection this week, having served out his suspension. And as for the West Tigers, they had the bye in round 1, so we are yet to see Benji Marshall's Tigers. It's really hard to glean too much from the trial games, although I didn't love what I saw. It is what it is. So I'll leave it at this stage. I don't want to make too many assumptions, but this season is no doubt a make or break for the West Tigers as they try to avoid a very, very unwanted wooden spoon 3-peat. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, the stats, they do all favour the Raiders here, with Canberra winning 13 of the last 15 encounters. That includes 7 straight. They've also only lost to the Tigers once at home since 2016. And the live odds currently have Canberra at $1.40 favourites, with the West Tigers coming back at $2.70, which is probably a little bit short in my opinion. The line for this one is 6.5 points, and the over and under is 44.5 points. It is really hard to go past the Raiders here. Obviously the Tigers will be rested after missing week 1, but man, the Raiders look pretty bloody good against the Knights, so I think they should be too strong at home. And again, we're yet to see the Tigers. I didn't like what I saw in the trial, so Canberra 1-12. Moving now to the second game on Saturday, it is the first placed North Queensland Cowboys hosting the 14th placed Newcastle Knights up in Townsville at Queensland Country Bank Stadium. Starting first with North Queensland, the Cowboys ascended to the top of the NRL ladder with a massive 43-18 point win over the Dolphins at Suncorp Stadium. After a really disappointing season in 2023, the Cowboys scored inside the 3rd minute and never really looked back. They tore the Dolphins to shreds on the edges, with Dearden and Drinkwater orchestrating, allowing the likes of Nanai, Lukey, Labert and Taulagi to dominate. While most teams last week seemed to struggle with the fitness and the resumption of the season, the Cowboys looked as fit as ever and looked ready to right all the wrongs of last year. And as for their teams list, there were no injuries last week, so I imagine the Cows will line up with the exact same 1-17. And as for Newcastle, the Knights were outplayed by a Canberra Raiders side hell-bent on revenge for their season-ending loss in 2023, getting beaten 28 points to 12. Newcastle came out of the blocks hot and looked very threatening early, with ball in hand especially, before their own mistakes and poor discipline halted any momentum, completing at just 68% and coming up with 15 errors. Their forward pack also struggled to make any inroads through the middle, with only Jacob Saifiti notching up over 100 run meters. Despite the loss, there were some good signs for the Knights. I thought new signing Kai Pearce-Paul was outstanding and looked to be a great inclusion, as did Jack Cogger, who ended up playing nearly 50 minutes off the bench. I do think though that Adam O'Brien needs to come up with a clear game plan for Cogger. If he is to take Gamble and Hastings in the halves, then he needs a better plan than just trying to bring Cogger on for the sake of bringing him on. That problem also gets bigger this week with Jaden Brayley expected to be back, which obviously may push Phoenix Crossland to the bench or out of the side, so plenty of decisions there for Adam O'Brien. And we just touched on a bit of teams list, but we'll wrap that up now too. So Anare Chuala was unable to finish the game with a quad strain and is unlikely to play this week. And as I just touched on too, Jaden Brayley could also make his long-awaited return this week. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, the Cowboys have won 3 of their last 4 meetings and have an outstanding record against the Knights in Townsville, winning 12 of their last 14 games at home, with the Knights' last win coming all the way back in 2015. And the bookmakers seem to like the Cows too, with them currently at $1.40, with Newcastle coming back at $2.90. The line for this one is 7.5 points, while the over-under is quite high at 46.5 points. This should be a good game. Obviously, both sides are very attack-orientated, so it should make for a cracking contest. But I do like the Cowboys here, 1-12. I think they've got more strike right across the park, where the Knights do seem to favour KP. So if the Cowboys can shut down Ponga, I think you go a long way to shutting down the Knights as a whole. And obviously, Drinkwater and Dearden just look to be back to their scintillating best last week. So I have no doubt that they'll back that up again this week. Moving now to the final game on Saturday, we have the 7th placed Melbourne Storm taking on the 10th placed NZ Warriors at Amy Park in Melbourne. Starting first with Melbourne, the Storm kept Craig Bellamy's perfect round 1 record alive with a gutsy defensive win over the 3-time defending Premier Panthers. Melbourne gave it everything they had, keeping the Panthers scoreless, which is even more impressive when you look at the numbers, as they lost almost every key metric, including completion rates, run meters, line breaks, missed tackles, and errors. But mate, you can't quantify heart. Cam Munster was a late scratching for the Storm, however his replacement Jonah Pezzett really held his own. It was certainly the type of performance that can really kickstart a season, and I have no doubt that the Melbourne Storm will continue to be an ever-present part of the finals puzzle. And in terms of teams list for the Storm, Munster will continue to be monitored this week. I'm sure, no doubt, he will be named to play, but we won't really know until kickoff. And Big Nelson Asafa Solomona is also expected back on deck this week, and I'd expect him to play a role on the bench. And as for my Warriors, they blew an early lead and a ton of possession, going down to the Cronulla Sharks 16 points to 12. Webby's men flew out of the gates, and it looked as though it was going to be a long night for the visitors before key injuries and fatigue started to set in. It really can't be understated how much of a loss Wade Egan is for that side, and even though the Warriors dominated in almost every key stat, they really did fail to throw a punch in the final stages, despite creating multiple chances. No doubt they'll be better for the run last week, but there's still plenty to be excited about, obviously, like AFB. Oh my days, that run was something else. Captain Fantastic Toru Harris just doing what he does, and obviously the return of RTS. So stay patient, Warriors fans. And as for the teams list, as I did just touch on, Wade Egan is out after suffering a nasty-looking elbow injury, which is a massive blow for the Warriors. Kurt Capewell also picked up a rib cartilage injury and will be monitored this week. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, it's no secret that the Storm have an incredible record over the Warriors, winning 14 straight games. They've also only lost to the Warriors once at home since 2011. And looking at the live odds, the Storm are $1.44 favourites, with the Warriors coming back at $2.80. The line for this one is currently at 6.5 points, and the over and under is 40.5 points. It does hurt me to say this, but I am going to take the Storm here 1-12. I really do think the loss of Wade Egan is massive for the Warriors, and the Storm will no doubt be on a high following that incredible defensive win against the Panthers last week, and may only be better if Munster is back in the side this week. So unfortunately, have to tip against my own team and take the Storm here 1-12. But as always, I'd happily take a Warriors win over an incorrect tip. Moving now to the first of 2 Sunday fixtures, starting first with the 5th placed Manly Sea Eagles taking on the 6th placed Sydney Roosters at 4 Pines Park. Starting first with Manly, the Sea Eagles capped off a monumental weekend in Las Vegas with an incredibly impressive performance over the Rabbitohs, 36 points to 24. It was a physical back and forward contest with regular momentum changes. The biggest talking point going into that game was the new signing Luke Brooks, and boy did he deliver on the big stage. Brooks looked reborn in that Manly jumper and already seemed to have a seamless connection with both DCE and Turbo, which is honestly a very, very scary sign for every other club because it is only going to get stronger as the season progresses. Tom Trbojevic also made a grand return to first grade, which once again proved just how important he is to that Manly side's success. There is plenty to like about the Sea Eagles after their first outing, but if I did have to play devil's advocate for a bit, they did concede 24 points, and we all know how important defence is, especially if you plan to win a premiership. Now, looking over the teams list for this week, Jason Saab looked to have done his hamstring, so will be sidelined. That probably means that maybe Vega or Talau come into the starting side, and that could be in any sort of combination of wing and centre, but we'll have to see how Anthony Seibold plays that. And as for the Chooks, Robbo's Roosters kicked off their 2024 campaign with a big upset win over last year's grand finalists, taking down the Brisbane Broncos 20 points to 10. The Chooks played a very disciplined game, owning the contest through the middle and completing near 100% for the first 40. James Tedesco also made a welcome return to form, playing like it was 2019 all over again, competing on every play and putting a ton of pressure on his opposite number under the high ball. Joey Manu, Tyrell May and Lindsay Collins were all outstanding. However, the game and victory was overshadowed by a racist remark from Roosters new recruit Spencer Leniu, who will now miss a significant amount of time through suspension. Overall though, a very impressive start for the Roosters. And in terms of the Roosters side for this week, Dom Young is expected to be available for selection as he recovers from that neck injury, while Jared Waerea-Hargreaves is also available for selection this week, having served out his suspension. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, the Chooks have won 7 of the past 10 games against the Sea Eagles and have a half-decent record at Brookie, claiming the Chockies in 4 of their last 6 outings at the ground. And as for the live odds, Manly are currently underdogs at $2.05, with the Roosters currently $1.78 favourites. Very, very small line for this one, 1.5 points, with the over and under currently sitting at 42.5 points. I do think this will be a tight game, but I do like the Sea Eagles here. I really do like what I saw from them in Vegas. As I did just touch on that, they did concede quite a few points, but obviously the Rabbitohs are a very attack-orientated side, so that is to be expected. As long as Turbo and Brooks and DCE are fit and firing, I really do think that the Sea Eagles are a side to be worried about this year. So until they prove me wrong, I am going to back them. Moving now to the last game of round 2, we have the 17th placed, last placed Dolphins taking on the 2nd placed St. George Illawarra Dragons at KO Stadium in Redcliffe. Starting first with the Dolphins, unlike the Storm, the Finns couldn't keep their undefeated round 1 streak intact, getting completely outpaced by the North Queensland Cowboys, 43 points to 18. Wayne Bennett's side was in the contest early but fell away late, unable to contain the Cowboys on the edges. New recruit Tom Flegler looked good, while star fullback Hamiso Tabuai-Fidow showed glimpses of his brilliance, although had very limited chances in open space. The Dolphins also came up with far too many crucial mistakes in defence and lacked a bit of direction in the halves. Certainly not the start that Wayne Bennett would have been hoping for. And as for their expected teams list this week, Connolly Lemuelu is looking at an extended stint on the sidelines after dislocating his kneecap in the first half, and that will no doubt put more strain on the Finns, who already are without Tom Gilbert. So really, really unlucky for the Finns and obviously Connolly, so wishing him a speedy recovery. And as for St. George, the Dragons ushered in the Shane Flanagan era with a comprehensive 28-4 point win over the Gold Coast Titans. The Saints started fast and physical just as they did in the trials, before errors crept into their game, meaning they only saw 27% of territory in the first 40. Whatever Flano said to the team at halftime clearly worked though, as the Dragons blew the Titans off the park in the second stint, running in 22 unanswered points. Tyrell Sloan was at his electric best, while Zach Lomax and Moses Sully seemingly ran with a renewed purpose. Overall, it was a very exciting game, albeit against a fairly depleted Titan side, but it does show what the Dragons can do when they are at their best. In terms of teams list for this one, the Saints, they made it through the game relatively unscathed, but did lose Blake Laurie just before kickoff, but I'd expect him to be named to play this week. Looking at the two sides head to head, it's one apiece in this new rivalry, with both sides winning at home in 2023. The live odds currently have the Dolphins ahead at $1.82, with St. George coming back at $2 even. The line for this one very short as well at 1.5 points, with the over and under currently sitting at 45.5 points. I do like the Dragons in this one. I thought the Dragons looked pretty good against the Titans, albeit rather depleted Titans side. They obviously need to fix up their errors, which they did pretty well on that second 40. And if they can do that and play strong for an extended period of time, I do think they can outpoint the Dolphins, who are now dealing with a few key injuries early and really lacking a bit of depth in their halves. So I do think the Dragons can pinch another one and retain the top of the ladder position. So Dragons for me, 1-12. Thank you as always for watching. I really do appreciate all the support. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button, leave a like on the video, drop your tips and predictions in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.